Yes, today we are going to see limiting factor. A limiting factor is a factor which is limited in supply. Example of limiting factor are labor hours, machine hours. It can be in terms of materials, in terms of kilogram required for production. So in case there is a limiting factor, the business cannot produce to the maximum capacity or to the required capacity. For example, if a business has to produce 500 units of X, 400 units of Y, and 200 units of Z. In case there is a limiting factor, the business cannot produce to the maximum capacity. Therefore, it can produce 500 units of good X, 400 units of good Y. Maybe it cannot produce good Z because there is a limiting factor. For example, labor hours. Labor cannot work overtime, so it cannot produce to the maximum capacity when there is a limiting factor. Limiting factor is also known as principal budget factor or key factor. So what you have to remember, when there is a limiting factor, the company cannot produce to the required or maximum capacity. So there are certain steps that we'll have to follow in case of limiting factor. First of all, number one, steps to be followed. Steps to be followed in case of limiting factor. Step to be followed. First one, we have to identify the limiting factor. Identify the limiting factor. We have to identify or ascertain the limiting factor, whether it is labor hours, machine hours, materials in terms of kilogram, and so on. Second, we have to, once the identification has been completed, we have to calculate shortage or surplus of limiting factor. So if there is a surplus, so it means that there is no limiting factor, the business can produce to the maximum capacity. And third, we have to calculate contribution per unit. And then we have to calculate contribution per limiting factor. Contribution per limiting factor. And we have to calculate total contribution, and then finally we have to calculate using optimal strategy. This one, optimal strategy. So the number of units to be produced, and then we have to calculate total contribution, and finally total profit. So here are the steps that we have to follow when there is a limiting factor. First of all, we have to identify the limiting factor, calculate shortage or surplus of limiting factor. Then we have calculate contribution per unit, contribution per limiting factor, optimal strategy, and then calculate total contribution, total profit. So these are the steps that we have to know when we are doing a question on limiting factor. So the first step, to identify the limiting factor. So how to identify the limiting factor? We are going to see through this question. Products A, B, C, D. 4 products. The company is producing 4 products. Direct material to produce product A, $10, $20 for B, $30 for C, $40 for D. Direct labor, we have to pay $5 for A, $15 for B, $10 for C, and $20 for D. Variable overheads, example electricity, $2 for A, $6 for B, $8 for C, $12 for D. Selling price, $150 for product A, $200 for product B, $175 for product C, $160 for product D. Sales demand in units 5,000 units, 4,000 units, 6,000 units, 3,000 units. Note, direct material cost $5 per kilo, and this will be restricted to 50,000 kilograms. Total fixed costs with 109,000 required. Optimal production plan, units to be produced for A, B, C, and D. Calculate total profit. So first of all, we know that when there is a limiting factor, so when there is a limiting factor, we know that we cannot produce all product because there is a limiting factor. So now, direct material costs $5 per kilo, and this will be restricted to 50,000 kilos. Therefore, materials is a limiting factor. So first of all, we have step 1, identification. Identification of limiting factor. Identification of limiting factor. Now first we have A, B, C, D. So what is the material cost for A? Material cost for A, $10. Material cost for B, $20. Material cost for C, $30. Material cost for D, $40. So how much we have to pay for materials? Cost 5 per kilo. $5 per kilo, $5 per kilo, $5 per kilo, $5 per kilo. So how many kilo we have for this one? 2 kilogram. This one, 4 kilogram. And this one, 6 kilogram. And this one, 8 kilogram. So this is an identification of limiting factor. Here we have identified the limiting factor. We need 2 kilograms to produce product A, 4 kilograms to produce product B, 6 kilograms to produce product C, and 8 kilograms to produce product D. Now we are going to see the second step. The first step, identification of limiting factor. Now we are going to see the second step. The second step, to calculate shortage or surplus or limiting factor. So we have this one, product A, product B, product C, product D. So how many units we are producing for product A? 5,000 units. And what is the limiting factor? 2 kilograms. So this one we need the formula units times limiting factor. Units times limiting factor. This one we will need 10,000 kilograms, and then we have to produce 4,000 units for product B. This one we need 4 kilograms. This will give us 8,000 kilograms, and then 6,000 units times 6 kilograms. This one we need 36,000 kilograms, and the last one 3,000 units. We need 8 kilograms. This one 24,000 kilograms. So in all, how many kilograms we need? 78,000 kilograms. 78,000 kilograms required. Material required. Required materials in terms of kilograms. 78,000 kilograms. And then available. How many materials we have available? Materials in terms of kilograms, we have only 50,000 kilograms. 50,000 kilograms. Therefore, there is a shortage of 38,000 kilograms. This is a shortage. So when there is a limiting factor, so we will need 38,000 kilograms more. So we cannot produce all product A, B, C, D, etc. equally. So here we are, 38,000 kilograms. This is this one. we will, this one is 16,000, so this is 16,000. Therefore, we will get 86,000. 86,000. This will give us 36,000 will be required. So take 36,000. So here we are. This is the formula to calculate shortage or surplus units times limiting factor. The units 5,000 times limiting factor. First one 2 kilogram, 4,000 times 4 kilogram, 6,000 times 6 kilogram, and 3,000 times 8 kilogram. They got 6 with. So therefore this is the shortage we have already calculated. Now the third one we are going to calculate contribution per unit. Contribution per unit. Now we will have product A, B, product A, B, C, D. Selling price. What is the selling price? For product A, selling price 150, and then 200, and then 175 and 160. Less variable costs. We have direct materials. Direct material 10, 20 francs, $10, $20, $30, $40. Direct labor. How much? 5, 10, 5, 15, and then we have 10 and 20. Variable overheads. Variable overhead. 2, 6 with 10. 2, 6 with 10. Okay, no? Therefore, we have to calculate contribution per unit. Selling price less variable cost. Contribution per unit. This one will give us 133. And then 159. Et puis 127, and then 88. 127 et 88. Therefore, contribution per unit, and then we have to calculate contribution per limiting factor. We have to put the limiting factor 2 kilogram, 4 kilogram, 4 kilogram, 6 kilogram, and 8 kilogram. So this is the limiting factor that we have identified, and then we have to calculate contribution per limiting factor. Contribution per limiting factor. This one, contribution per limiting factor 66.5, and then we have 39.75, and then we have 21.7, and then we have 11. Contribution per limiting factor, and then we have to do the ranking of products. Ranking highest contribution per limiting factor first. This will be first, second, third, and fourth. This is the ranking. So which product we are going to produce first? Product A, and then product B. If material is sufficient, we can produce product B, then product C, and finally, if we can produce product D or not. Okay. So here we are. We have to calculate contribution per unit, contribution per limiting factor, and then we get ranking. We rank the product according to the highest contribution per limiting factor. And now we are going to see how much we can produce for product A, product B, product C, and product D. Okay, now? This one is called the optimal strategy. Optimal strategy. So we are going to seek optimal strategy. that is the number of units to be produced, optimal strategy. So here we take units time limiting factor. Good. First we have to produce what is the unit? 5000 time limiting factor 2 kilogram. Available materials. Available materials. We have 50,000 kilogram. And for A we will use 10,000 kilogram. So 40,000 kilogram will be left. And then second we will have B. What is the number of units for B? 4,000. Time limiting factor 4 kilogram. This will give us 16,000 kilogram. So we will use 16,000 kilogram to produce B. 24,000 kilogram will be left. And then C, the third one, C. Third, what is the limiting factor? 6 kilogram. And then we have to produce C, we have to produce 6,000. 6,000 times 6, 36,000 kilogram, but we have only 24,000 kilogram. In this case, 24,000 divided by 6, this will give us 4,000 units. Therefore, all materials will be used. Okay. Therefore, we can produce 5,000 units of A, 4,000 units of B, and 4,000 units of C. Instead of producing 6,000 units of C, we can produce only 4,000 units. And therefore, for D, product D, we cannot produce at all because we don't have enough material. So, limiting factor is preventing the business to produce D, and some of the C also cannot be produced. So, we can produce 5,000 units of A, B 4,000 units, C 4,000 units. This is called the optimal strategy. This will determine how many units we can produce. Now we are going to calculate maximum contribution. So maximum contribution. We have maximum contribution and then we calculate maximum profit, total profit. So this one is very easy. Maximum contribution. Maximum contribution. So we take the first one, A. What is the contribution per unit for A? We have already calculated 133 times units, 5,000 units. This will give us how much? 133 multiplied by, ça veut donner 665 000. 665 000. And then for B, we can produce 4,000 units. What is the contribution per unit? 159. Donc, we multiply, this will give us 636 000. And then, third, C, we can produce only 4,000 units. Time contribution per unit, 127. Ça nous donne 508 000. 508 000. Then we get total contribution. Total contribution. Total contribution. This will give us a total of 1,809 000. 1,809 000. Less fixed cost 809 000. Ça nous donne 1 million. So here we are, so far concerning limiting factor. So we have to follow the step. The first step, we have to identify the limiting factor. Once the limiting factor has been identified, then we calculate surplus or shortage of limiting factor. Then we have to calculate contribution per unit, contribution per limiting factor, ranking, and then we will produce strategy, the optimal projection plan. So in this case, we take units time limiting factor. This will determine, will give us how many units we can produce for each product, and then we calculate the maximum contribution, units time contribution per units time contribution per unit. This will give us total contribution. Then less fixed cost, we get total profit. So here we are concerning limiting factor. Thank you very much for your attention.